So we're here to talk about logopraxis. Right from its inception, logopraxis has been an experiment in how to be in spiritual community through a shared lived experience of the word working in each other's life. So the term logopraxis is basically, it's come from the Greek words logos, meaning to practice, logos meaning the word, and praxis meaning to practice the word. So simply means practice, to practice the word. And as I said, it's really been right from the start an experiment in how to be together with others in a spiritual community. So in that sense, it's twofold in nature. It has both an individual component and a community or a group component. So in the practice, the individual carries out their work, their practice, with a view to sharing that experience of the word with others in a small group setting. And it's done in the recognition that what is brought to the group is a gift from the Lord, from each person's willingness to engage with the Logos, with the text. So as the group gathers together and witnesses each other's work, the Lord as the word then becomes more visible in the midst of the group. And we have then the overarching catchphrase of logopraxis, which is making the Lord visible in our midst. And that, of course, comes from Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. So the word as the Lord is acknowledged as being the principal agent that guides and directs the processes involved for both the life of the individual and the life of the group. Now you'll notice here in this logo that we have an image of a maze with the light of the influx of divine life coming down from above. You can either view this as the divine life finding its way to you, to your center, becoming your center, or you can look at it as the divine life guiding you out of the maze that is your mind. You can look at it both ways if you like. I'm going to leave that with you to reflect on how it speaks to you. So the logopraxis approach is founded on the principle that a text of some sort is required in order for divine revelation to be offered to us and to be received. That we cannot come to see the truth and the nature of spiritual realities from our own intelligence, and therefore a text is needed of some sort. And for the purpose of the logopraxis approach, these texts are the books of the Bible that have an inner meaning relating to the Lord's life as identified by Emanuel Swedenborg, and also the works that Swedenborg produced. So we have the sacred scriptures and the works of Swedenborg. And there's a collective acknowledgement that these texts are together have been given to support the regeneration of the human mind, or into a human form, and hence the development of a new church within each of us. So it's because these texts reveal the divine and its operation within our minds that they're collectively referred to as the word. Now, this may not be your experience with the texts as they stand here for you today, but the premise in logopraxis is that whatever reveals the Lord's presence in your life can be held as the word or the logos. And certainly for those who have engaged and persisted with the logopraxis approach, these texts collectively in this sense have proved to be an ever deepening reality of that, of the Lord for them. So in logopraxis, we're asked to read the text, specifically reading it for application to our life, as opposed to an intellectual understanding. That's not to say an intellectual understanding isn't important, but we're really focusing on reading for application to life. And I'll explain what I mean by that. reading the text in this way is likely to require a historical and a habitual shift in how we normally come to the text. For most of us, where reading's concerned, it's geared around extracting information we need as efficiently as possible and trying to understand the concepts that we're reading and that are being explained. And this is a skill that we've developed in response to the vast amount of information that comes at us every day, and also something we've been taught in our academic and schooling systems. However, in the Logopraxis approach, we're focusing on trying to be more consciously engaged in our reading of these texts. So holding them as spiritual texts and learning to read with conscious attention. So leaning in and listening for what is reaching out to us, what we're being drawn to, what questions are arising, and also learning to observe our inner talk, chatter, if you like, as we read. And in this sense, for me, the shift was really more of a movement from a head-based reading of the text to a heart-based reading of the text. And I still find it very freeing, because it means I don't have to understand everything I'm reading. I just have to listen out for something that reaches out to me and then work from there. So we're learning to read consciously with a level of attention and sensitivity that we don't usually bring to how we read. But it's a skill, and we learn it by doing it through practice. And we call these skills spiritual literacy skills. So we start to acquire the ability to divide our attention between what we're reading on the page and then what we're experiencing more internally as we're reading, as we're engaging with the text. And what we find is that we start out with the experience that we are studying the text, and it's more of a one-way dialogue. And then it shifts to realizing that the text or the word or the logos is actually studying us, because the text is taking us through a study of ourselves, and it's the means by which we can do this. How does it do it? How does it do this? So when I say reading for application to life, I mean the life of our mind, of your mind, of our thoughts and feelings or affections, of our inner states of being. So in Logopraxis work, we hold to the principle that all revelation in the text is given to teach us about ourselves, about what exists within ourselves, within the landscape of our own minds, which means that everything in the text is relevant to us. And if we can't see how it's relevant to us, then that's where our work lies. So the work is very much about looking to find how what's described in what we're reading finds an illustration in our own life. So we always work from the premise that what the text says is true is actually true, but as to how it is true is something that we each must individually explore for ourselves. And we do this by taking a truth or a statement, or a statement of truth, or a spiritual principle in the text that we're reading, and then looking for illustrations in our own life, in our own inner life experiences. So what happens then is that when we read the text as descriptive of spiritual states within our own process of coming to know the divine. So from that perspective, in Logopraxis, the spiritual world that's described in the text that we're reading, in the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, it doesn't exist outside the human mind. The spiritual world is the human mind. Now, the aim of working more consciously with our mental states is so that we can see spiritual principles in operation in our mind as we engage in our day-to-day life. So to see spiritual principles illustrated in our life then moves them from being something abstract to something practical, because it offers a personal experience, direct experience of the divine operation in our mind. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for application to life. So we start out, Logopraxis runs on a 2-week cycle, and we start out with a task and we work with that over 2 weeks. And then we meet with our groups, our life groups, to share how we went working with it. And the purpose of setting these tasks is observation, because it invites an opportunity to see something. So we take a spiritual truth or a principle statement, and then we look for illustrations in our life. And what most often happens is that we also see what comes to resist that idea in our life as well. Now, our conditioning is so far as setting goals or tasks where our day-to-day life is concerned is usually described, or can usually be described, as an outcome-orientated approach. So we set ourselves a task, and then we measure our success or failure of that task depending on the degree to which we actually achieved it. And this works really well in day-to-day aspects. It enables us to get things done that need doing. But in Logopraxis, the goal or task setting isn't concerned with achieving an outcome, but it's instead about setting up conditions to remind us to observe a truth or a spiritual principle at work in our life, or at least to observe what comes up when we attempt to work with that task. And I say attempt because what often happens is when we look to implement a task, then all kinds of difficulties arise that seem to stand in opposition to actually doing it, to working with it, to even remembering it, and sometimes even formulating the task in the first place. But we acknowledge in Logopraxis that it's the presence of these difficulties and resistances which gives us something to work with. So we have an aphorism in Logopraxis, which is, success can be measured in failure, because it's often our failure to measure up to the expectations that we set for ourselves that gives us material that we need to see. And also that without that resistance, there's no opportunity for self-compulsion and a building of a new spiritual, or a new will in spiritual matters. So again, we recognize that the text is always offering us something, even when it's not obvious, and even when things don't seem to go according to what we first set out with in mind. So it's only through the practice of truths that we can come to see what resists them, and the self within us that identifies with this resistance as well. And what I mean by that is, often in our struggle with the process, in finding a task and working with it and trying to remember it, is that the resistances that come up give us insights into the type of mental patterns of thoughts and feelings and inner self-talk that occur when we struggle with anything in general in our life. And then that allows us to see the self that is identifying with those struggles. And in this self is what Swedenborg refers to as the hellish proprium, or the infernal proprium. So in Logopraxis, there's an acknowledgement in the idea that in order to be free from identifying with that proprium, we need to see it first. So in this sense, spiritual life is very much a life of contrasts. You know, that it's coming to see, it's through coming to see what resists heaven that we can see more heaven more deeply. We can't know the heavenly proprium unless we come to know what the hellish proprium looks like. We can't know what good is unless we know what evil is. We can't know what truth is unless we understand what falsity is. So, you know, you have this need to have lightness in order to see the dark, and the darkness also in order to see the light. Both are needed and acknowledged. Which is how we end up with another common saying in Logopraxis, that the freeing is in the seeing. Okay, so I've just got a little diagram here just to give you a brief image of what the process, the 2-week cycle looks like. There's 6 steps. So the first half of the circle here, I'm hoping you can all see my arrow. Can you see my arrow pointer that I'm wiggling around?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. That's the first week. So the first week really is about everyone in the group usually is reading the same text, and you read it and you're listening out for what you've drawn to. It's not about trying to get your head around the whole reading or understanding everything you're reading. It is about listening for what reaches out to you, and then you'll come back and then just review those sections that reached out to you, and then from there finding a principle that you can work with to set a task. And it might be something really simple like the Lord is the source of the life that flows into me, and how do I know this to be true in my life? It might also be something really simple. I think I had one once where it was about water corresponds to truth, and the way truth cleanses and washes us can be represented in how water cleanses and washes us. And my task was every time I turn on the tap to try and remember that principle. So it was really simple task. So it can vary. And then the second part of the week is just putting into practice. So working with it. We encourage people to kind of keep a daily journal just to reflect on, did I remember my task today? When I remembered, did it change how I was thinking about things? Those kind of questions, and then preparing a summary to bring to your life group. So I'll move on and we'll go a little bit more into some of these. So what I would like is, I'd like maybe 6 volunteers just to take in turns of reading one of these numbers each, just to bring in some participation. Would someone like to start by reading the first number here for me? Yeah, is that Esther? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The combination of the angelic communities into one heaven takes place in accord with the following laws. Number 1, every complete whole in heaven arises from the pattern of many sharing their lives with one another in accord with the harmony of heaven.
Thanks. I'm going to read 2 for me.
I'll be happy to. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay. Love is spiritual togetherness, which leads to the harmony of heaven.
I will take 3 then. There must be a universal bond in order that the individual constituents may be held in combination and interconnection.
Helen? Yeah.
The universal bond must enter into and create the individual bonds.
I'll read 5. The universal bond is the Lord, that is, it is the love that comes from him, and from this, the love directed towards him.
I'll do 6. The individual bonds are derived from the universal. They are the bonds of mutual love or charity towards the neighbour. You read the last bit.
These are the laws by virtue of which heaven, consisting of countless angelic communities, nevertheless exists as one total human being. Arcana Celestia 9613, section 3.
Thanks. Yeah, so I really love that quote. I just think it sums up group life beautifully. And I really loved this section in love is spiritual togetherness. So as I said earlier, logopraxis has 2 dimensions to it, and neither can exist in practice without the other. So you have the work or the life of the individual and the work of the life of the group. So I think this number from Arcana Celestia, or aka Secrets of Heaven, sums it up really well, in that we cannot come to know what the Lord or the divine is without the existence of another that is outside of ourselves, that isn't perceived as us. So we need others to experience the divine. Love needs another to express itself and to be made known. And this is the nature of love. And there's some really lovely numbers around that idea more in Divine Love and Wisdom 47 and 48. We see this also in the paradox of the duality of the one being. So the paradox being that the divine is one, but we as finite beings can only experience it through the conjunction of parts being brought together in union. So we need distinctions so that there can be an experience of things being brought together. So we need separations and unions, which is very much about what spiritual life is about and is experienced as. And throughout Swedenborg's works, we have terms that come together like this as well. We have love and wisdom being brought together, good and truth, our affections and thoughts, or our will and understanding, what is within or more internal, and what is without or external, what is of a higher nature and what is of a lower nature. We have the literal text of the Bible and the inner sense of what it reveals to us. And then we have this concept also of the individual and that which is other, which I think can be extended to the individual and the group or the collective. So as a logo practitioner, you have this experience of you as an individual coming into your life group in a group, and you're bringing this unique expression of how the word has worked in your life, and everyone else is bringing that too. And together, you have this beautiful variety of unique expressions being brought together, which allows you to have an experience or a great awareness of the whole of what the divine or the Lord looks like. So Logopraxis very much honors the principle that perfection is found in variety, because it leaves people in freedom to develop a personal understanding of the word and its application to their life. And there's an acknowledgement that what each person brings is unique and fulfills a valuable part in contributing to the overall experience of the Lord becoming present in the midst, which is also very much the concept of what Swedenborg talks about as the grand man or the grand human, where all of the members fulfill a specific use that contributes to the functioning of the overall whole of the human form. So a life group is a practice group. So we work over a 2-week cycle, and then we meet together and bring a summary of this work. And I've got here a snapshot of an online group. Each of these windows are actually in a different time zone in Australia. Most of our groups are online. There's about 10 online groups at the moment, maybe about 5 or 6 face-to-face groups. And most of the online groups would involve different continents. So we'll often have Australians and people from the US or Canada in a group meeting. So like we're doing now, you'll have a 7 a.m. and a 7 p.m. time. We have people from Canada, South Africa, UK and New Zealand as well. So it's very much a global community. A group usually consists of anywhere between 3 and 7 people with a facilitator. And I say that they're practice groups because the group sphere offers a supportive environment where others are also practicing and looking towards the development of spiritual literacy skills. So it's a very different experience to practicing out in our day-to-day life, because you immediately have this space where each member is seeking to cultivate a conscious inner sensitivity in both the act of speaking and listening. So there's an open willingness to work by all, and an acknowledgement that all who are present are leaning in and listening for what is arising for them internally. And we speak to this as we're listening to what the Spirit is saying to the church within. what the Lord is saying through, as each person shares. So as each person shares their submission, and a submission usually just includes reading a section of the text that you've chosen, sharing the principle that you've drawn out of that, the task that you came up with, and then what came up for you when you shared the task. And those listening are asked to read what is being offered through the speaker in the same way that they're asked to read the text when they approach it. So we're leaning in and listening for where our attention is being drawn to, what reaches out for you, to hear questions that are arising, and to listen for spiritual principles and truth. So it's very much about hearing what the Lord is saying to you through another person's work in the Word. And that's kind of how round one works. We'll come to the rounds in a minute, and then you get an opportunity to share that later. So reading what is offered in the same way we read the text. So as I said, there's 3 rounds. A life group meeting operates on 3 rounds, and it's structured so that each round carries a specific focus of work for both the individual and for the group as a whole as well. So the group working it together as a whole. There's usually a section of something meditative and contemplative, usually something from sacred scripture like a psalm that's read between each rounds to break them up. And most groups usually start with some kind of meditative reading of the text too. Of something from the psalm. There are some groups that sing between rounds. It just depends on what the group decides to do. But whatever's done, it's done in a way to remind everyone that it's a spirit of contemplation and worship. So round 1, as I said, each member is offered an opportunity to give a summary of their work. We don't share the nitty-gritty details of personal life. We're very much sharing what came up for us when we tried to work with a task, or even our struggle to find a task, but we're trying to offer it in a way that doesn't give specifics or a lot of personal information about events and people. And the reason for that is that so that everyone else listening can more easily connect in with their own process within it, rather than it being something very specific to this person's life. So by universalizing what you're offering, it means that more people can connect in with it. And then those listening in round 1, again, are asked to focus their attention on what they're hearing the Spirit of the Lord say to them through what the speaker's offering. And then in round 2, there's an opportunity to feedback what you've heard. For me, round 2 is very much the center of sacredness in a life group meeting. It's like this beautiful condensed summary of unique expressions of each participant's experience of the word. And because you've worked hard to hear it as statements of the Lord speaking to you, as statements of truth, you get this really deep, beautiful unfolding of variety of insights and affections that have been shared as everyone kind of offers it. And I like to think of it as being placed on the altar. I've got this image of the bread. It's also very much feels like the bread that's been broken, the bread and the wine being passed around. And I've chosen this little quote here from Psalms because I thought it spoke beautifully to that idea that my testimonies are also my delight and my counselors. And that just sums up the experience of what round 2 can feel like when the group is all working to focus their attention on hearing what each other's saying as the Lord's speaking to them. And then round 3, probably out of all 3 rounds, is probably the more casual round. Anything else that's come up in the reading of the actual text of the section of numbers from the doctrines or the writings, and also an opportunity just to share any other reflections that have come to light during the process of the meeting. It's also very much, I guess, a transition round because everyone knows it's the last round. So there's this unspoken, I guess, work of consolidating what you've heard and processing how you're going to work and move out with it as well. But it's very much, you know, in meeting together, there's this sacred space that can be realized where the Lord is known or can be known as what has been worked into each member's willingness to engage with the text. And it's that bread that's broken when shared that opens our hearts to see the Lord in our midst. So really, in summary, the Logopraxis framework is very simple, and it's a simple way of engaging with the word with the aim of working with it in a community. And the approach is just based on a few key principles, really, that in order for a faith to be a living, saving faith, then truths from the text need to be applied to our life, and the text needs to be read with application to the life of the mind. We can then become and have a personal direct witness to the transformative power of truths drawn from the word, and that the sharing of this with others is the basis for spiritual community. And that community is a community of practice.